Hello, my name is Lilian Okibe. Welcome to my channel. So if you've ever attempted to grow a lock sticker, or if you suffered from like hair loss, alopecia and the likes, then you're most likely familiar with like new growth, like hair growing in places that you once had no hair. And that can mean like you have new growth and like loose strands just sticking around in random places. Now the question I normally get from you guys is, what should you do to this new growth? Should you add like the new growth to an already existing lock, or should you create a new lock? So in today's video, we're going to be talking all about that. If that sounds like something that you're interested in, then please keep on watching. Now, before we go ahead into this video, let me say that there's a difference between new growth, as in hair growing in places where there once was no hair, you know, and hair growing away from the lock, right? There's a difference. A few months ago, I made a video talking about hair growing away from the lock and like what can cause hair growing away from the lock and all the like. So if you want to understand that more in depth, I'm going to link the video up in the iCard for you to check out. But basically, the difference between new growth that we're talking about in this video and hair growing out of the lock is that for new growth, what happens is when you created your lock, right, those kind of like the new growth that you're seeing now, there was no hair in that area before, but like maybe one thing or the other, maybe because of your good hair practices, now all of a sudden you now have hair growing in places that once had no hair. So when you created your starter locks, those strands from the beginning of your journey, those strands have not necessarily been with that particular, with any lock whatsoever. So new hair is just growing in a place that once had no hair. Now when I'm talking about when you talk about hair growing away from the lock, most times it's as a result of something you are doing or something you have done that has removed the hair from the lock that it should normally belong to. What we are talking about here is new growth, right? You once had no hair in that area, most likely maybe around your edges. Maybe when you started your locks, you did not have hair in that area, or maybe you suffered from like hair loss or like alopecia, maybe postpartum hair loss and all the likes, and hair was not there before, but all of a sudden like hair is now growing in that area. So those strands of hair have never really been a part of any lock. So that's what we are talking about in this video. Now, how can you tell, like when you from an outsider, from a third party looking at your hair, you can't really tell the difference, in the sense that they look the same. They look like loose strands, just not being a part of the lock. But how you're going to know whether it is like new growth, as in you once had no hair there, you now have hair there, or hair growing away from the lock, as in something happened and broke the hair or removed the hair from the lock? How you know is when you inspect like the neighboring locks around that new growth, right? If you notice that the base, like the root of your hair, is as thick as it has always been, the roots of those locks are as thick as they've always been, but somehow you just see that you now have new hair strands like just standing on their own, that's a huge sign that can tell you that this is new growth, not necessarily hair that is growing away from the lock. Now if it is hair that is growing away from the lock, you notice that the lock or the locks around, you're going to see one or more of those locks that have kind of like gotten thinner at the roots, like in the sense that the root is no longer as dense as it used to be. You're going to need to be familiar with your hair. Like in some very mild cases, it may be difficult to tell, but if you're someone that is very familiar with your hair, with your locks, then you're going to be able to tell the difference. In this case that we're talking about in this video, all your locks look the same. Like all your locks are as thick as ever, nothing is happening, nothing has changed, all your locks are thick and everything, but you just have some new strands, you know, around that are just like standing on their own. That's a sign that it's new growth. Another thing that can tell you that it is new growth is if you allow it to grow. Like if you do not address it in the moment, if you wait for maybe 6 months or more and allow it to grow out, you're going to see that for this case, which is new growth, right, the lock is going to continue to grow normally, right? But for the case of hair locks growing away, or strands rather growing away from the lock, you're going to notice that over time you see that the new locks that are forming at the roots will be like kind of thinner than the remaining length of the locks. So that's another sign that can tell you whether it is hair growing away from the lock or just like normal new growth of no hair there, now you have hair there. The two options you have when you have new growth is you can either add, many of you already know this, basically you can either add the new growth to a neighboring lock, right, or you can create a new lock. Now let's go ahead and talk about the advantages and disadvantages of both methods. Now if you're going to be adding the new growth to a neighboring lock, the advantages of that is, number one, it's going to give you like a neater or a cleaner look. If you're someone that you always like your hair to look all put together, you don't really like loose strands all over the place, and you don't like tiny locks sticking all over the place. Like, one of the advantages of adding the lock to a neighboring lock is that adding the strands rather to a neighboring lock is that this is going to be sorted out. Like, you're not going to be creating any new baby lock, and so your hair is going to look uniform and, you know, seamless. Another advantage of like adding the new growth to a neighboring lock is your resulting lock is going to get thicker eventually. So if you add the new growth to, let's say you add the new growth to one lock, you're going to notice that over time, as the hair continues to grow and as the new growth locks in with that lock is going to get thicker. So this is something that is really nice. If you have like a lock that is around that new growth that seems to be not as thick as you want, right? Maybe you want to, you know, make the base a little stronger. Adding the new growth to that lock is going to help make that lock stronger. So that's another advantage. Now the third advantage of this method is that you're not going to have uneven lock length, because if you go ahead and create a new lock, obviously this new lock is not going to be of the same length as like your previous, like your older locks, right? So this method is going to give you like even results, in the sense that you're not going to have uneven lock lengths, right? The disadvantage of this method is that it's going to take a while, especially if the new growth is still pretty short, right? It's going to take a while for the new growth to lock with that lock that you have added it to, right? And what that means is, for the next few months, you're going to have that new growth keep like coming out of that lock, and you're going to have to keep like putting it back until it finally locks in that particular lock. So you're going to have that issue of loose strands not staying with the lock for a while until when it locks, or until when like the new growth grows long enough that it can comfortably stay in the lock that you have, you know, added it to. Another disadvantage of this method is potential tension. If you go ahead and add the new growth to a neighboring lock, this is not going to happen in all cases, but in some cases, because that new growth most times it's going to be a little far, because that was not part of the lock in the first place, right? So as you're putting it in that lock, you may cause a little bit of tension, and it may just like change the shape of your parts and change the shape of your locks, like the shape of, you know, the base of your lock, and that can mean tension, you know, as you're pulling that new growth into a neighboring lock, right? Now the next disadvantage, this is also connected to this points that I'm talking about, is as you're putting that new growth in that lock and it's probably causing tension, another thing that will happen is it's going to change. It can, depending on like how much the new growth is, where the new growth is and all that, it can change the shape of your lock. It can change the shape of your part, right? And I can't remember, I have a video, I think I've talked about this before on my channel. The shape of your part like largely affects like the shape of your locks, right? So if you add the new growth to the lock, it may end up making your the shape of your part weird, and that can result in that lock eventually growing to become flat, you know. And so one of the disadvantages is, and this is not really a disadvantage, so it depends on your preference, but if you're someone that you really want all your locks to be cylindrical, adding the new growth to a neighboring lock can alter the shape of your part and eventually make that particular lock a flat lock. Now let's go ahead to the next method, which is creating a new lock, right? Let's talk about the advantages and disadvantages. Now the first advantage, and I feel like this is kind of like the most important, is that because you're creating a new lock, right, you have that freedom to shape that new lock according to the parts, like you have that freedom to make the parts whatever shape you want. So you can make that the shape of your other locks, and that can help you have like uniform shaped locks in the sense that can make the lock that you're creating have a very similar shape as your other locks, even as it grows out, right? Another advantage of this method is that you're not going to have any form of tension. Most likely you're not going to have any form of tension because the new growth is standing on its own and it's forming a new lock. So you're most likely going to create a lock comfortably without having to pull like any strand of hair in any weird direction. So this method most likely is not going to give you any form of tension. Another advantage of this method is that the lock you create is going to stay put. Because you have created a full new baby starter locks, this is going to hold on in that lock a lot easier than if you're adding loose strands to a neighboring lock. Like, it is easier for your hair to stay in place when you create a new starter lock. So if you normally start your lock with 2-strand twists or braids or coils or whatever, it's going to be easier for you to create a new lock from the scratch, and it's going to be easier for the strands of your hair to stay in that lock from the scratch than for you to, you know, go into another lock, except if you're using like a crochet needle to, you know, crochet the new growth. But that's a story for another day. But basically, this method is going to give you like locks that are stable. So you're not, so once you create that lock, there's a high chance that you're not going to have so much issue with loose the strands of hair coming out of the lock and all that, because you're creating a new starter lock from scratch. This also means that it's going to be easier for you to maintain. Now, the disadvantage of this method is obviously you're going to have weird, like tiny baby locks sticking out randomly, especially if you have them around your edges. If you're someone that you like to wear like slicked up style, those tiny baby locks will not slick like with the rest of the hair until maybe when they get longer, right? So you're going to have tiny locks sticking up in random places. That's like the major disadvantage of this, of doing this. Another disadvantage is as your locks grow out, you're going to have uneven lock length. So obviously, because you're starting a new lock, it's not going to be the same length with the rest of your locks. So you're going to have, you know, uneven length of locks like all over your hair. Another disadvantage is that the new baby lock may be significantly smaller than the rest of your locks. And if you're someone that you don't know how to maintain smaller size locks, because the technique for maintaining chunky locks, like if you have like chunky big locks, for example, and then you have baby like new strands, and then you create another small baby lock, if you're not equipped with the right information to maintain that lock, you may end up experiencing breakage and thinning and all that on that particular lock, because you cannot afford to treat that tiny lock like you treat the rest of your hair. So another disadvantage of this method is that you stand the chance of having locks that are smaller than the rest of your hair, and eventually, like depending on how you maintain your hair, it may actually result in hair loss and thinning on those smaller locks. Now that we've talked about the advantages and the disadvantages of both ways, or like both methods, the big question is, so what should you do? Which one is better? What should you do? The answer to that question is it depends, right? It depends. It's not like no method is better than the other one, like generally. Like I said, like you guys have heard me say, both methods have advantages and disadvantages. So you have to sit down and think about what kind of look you'll be more comfortable with, number one. Then another thing is you want to pay attention to how much hair we're talking about, right? So if like the new growth, you just have a few strands, you know, here and there, it's not like a lot of hair that cannot, and you feel that you cannot comfortably create a lock that you're going to be comfortable with, then the best bet for you would be to just add it to a neighboring lock, or just leave it like that. Like, there's really nothing wrong with, especially if the hair is around your edges, right? There's really nothing wrong with having like some loose hair strands around your edges. I feel like if you feel that the hair is not like enough, like you don't have enough hair that will comfortably create a lock that of a size that you like, you can just leave it like that. You don't have to you don't have to create a lock if you're not comfortable with that. And also, you don't have to add, because if the hair is not as much as you would like, trying to force it into like a neighboring lock may be causing too much tension. So sometimes all you need may just leave it like that, just leave the loose strands like that, right? But another thing you want to bear in mind is, if the hair is a lot of hair, right? If it's not like baby hairs, if it's like substantial amount of hair, if you leave it like that, it will lock on its own. It will eventually lock on its own. And that's why sometimes you see people, this mostly happens like randomly in the lock. So you see a lot of people who have like tiny weird locks forming randomly within the core of their locks without them knowing, right? So that just goes to tell you, like, if the hair is like substantial and if it is like coarse enough, it's going to lock on its own, you know. So and that can be depending on the kind of look you're going for. So if the hair is very little and it's around your edges, you may decide to leave it alone, you know, and just have that as your baby hairs. And if you're someone that likes to sleek your hair, that can give you some hair to sleek whenever you want to wear a sleek style. But if it is a substantial amount of hair, you also want to pay attention to how much is that hair, right? Is it enough that you can create a lock that you're going to be comfortable with? And how far is it from the neighboring lock, right? If it is so far that you know that if you're going to be adding it to that neighboring lock, you're going to have some form of tension or discomfort, then it's better for you to just create a new lock. But if you feel that it is not so far and you have a good amount of hair and it can comfortably go into the neighboring lock, then you can go ahead and add it to the neighboring lock, right? So you just really want to, you know, look at your hair and see like which is going to give you the most advantages and the least disadvantages. So that's basically what you need to bear in mind. So that's basically all I have to share with you guys today. I hope you guys enjoyed this video and I hope you guys learned one or two things from it. If you did, don't forget to give it a thumbs up. And if this is your first time on my channel and you like to see more videos from me, then definitely subscribe. Thank you so much for watching. See you guys in my next video.